Today, I will tell you a story about a harvest night when an entire town held its breath as the rancher's daughter was forced to choose a husband. Before her stood 5 wealthy, powerful men, yet she turned her back on them all. She chose the orphan cowboy everyone else looked down on. And that single choice set fire to buried secrets, exposing corruption, betrayal, and sealing an oath carved forever into the dusty winds of Texas. Join the trail by subscribing, because every day a new story from the Wild West awaits you. The lanterns swung gently in the hot Texas wind, their orange glow catching on the strands of dried corn husks strung across the rafters. Fiddles scraped out a brisk tune, boots thumped against the wooden floor, and the harvest dance was in full swing. The air smelled of dust and cider, of sweat and roasted meat, but beneath the laughter lay a tension, sharp as a drawn knife. At the center of the hall stood Mae Reddick. Her chin lifted the glow of the lanterns, painting her face with gold and shadow. Her father Bartholomew stood at her side, broad and immovable as an old live oak. He raised his glass, and his voice carried over the music. Tonight my daughter will choose her husband, and with him the future of the Reddick ranch. The cheer that followed was loud, but Mae's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced toward the edge of the hall, where Dennis Crow leaned against a post. His dark eyes caught hers for the briefest instant, just long enough to betray the secret both carried. Then chaos struck. A shout rang out, chairs scraped back, and in the scuffle that followed, someone seized Dennis by the throat, with a thick rope of braided husk yanking it tight. He staggered, boots kicking the veins in his neck, bulging as the makeshift noose bit deep. For a moment, Mae could not breathe herself. She lunged forward, hand reaching for the knife strapped at her waist, the blade catching the lamplight as it was. The world held its breath, and then everything froze. 7 weeks earlier, the Texas Panhandle stretched endless. Beneath the August sun, the prairie shimmering in wafts of heat. Grass lay brown and brittle, crunching under hooves. Mae Reddick guided her sorrel mare down to the bed of the Canadian River, or what was left of it, long stretches of cracked mud, a thin ribbon of water trickling through the center. She dismounted, crouched low, and scooped the warm liquid in her hand. Too shallow. Too late in the season. The herd would need water, and the wells were running thin. She pulled her hat lower against the glare, muttering, "If the rains don't come soon, even the grass will give up." Hoofbeats approached, steady and measured. Mae rose, dusting her skirt, as a rider came into view. Dennis Crow, tall in the saddle shoulders, square, a worn saddlebag slung across his chest like a relic from another life. He reined in, lifting his hat with a brief nod. "Morning, Miss Reddick." "Mae." She corrected, her tone brisk. He gave the faintest twitch of a smile. "Your father sent me looking. Says today's a reckoning day." Her stomach tightened. Reckoning was always her father's word for debts, whether of cattle, coin, or blood. She swung back into the saddle, and together they rode toward the house that dominated the valley, like a fortress of wood and stone. Inside the main room, the air hung heavy with the heat of late summer. Maps of grazing rights and water routes lined the walls. Bartholomew Reddick stood behind his desk, hands planted on the wood, his face carved with lines that looked cut by the wind itself. "Mae," he said without greeting, "winter won't wait, and neither will debt. The Reddick name needs strength behind it. Bankers, drovers, men with ties to trade. You'll have to choose a husband by the harvest dance." She froze. "Father, no." He cut her off. "This land doesn't run on wishes. Keene brings cash. Trent brings credit. Either one will see this ranch through. But come harvest, you'll stand beside a man, fit to keep it." Mae's jaw clenched, though her voice stayed calm. "And if I don't?" Bartholomew's gaze hardened. "Then the ranch falls piece by piece. You can't hold it alone, and you know it." Before Mae could answer, the door swung open. Prudence Vale, the widowed hotel-keeper from Amarillo, swept in with a tray of coffee. Her black dress gleamed her smile, as polished as her silver earrings. "A young woman needs a steady home," she said sweetly, setting the tray down. "And a father needs to see his daughter safe. A harvest wedding would put everyone's mind at ease." Mae bit back a retort. She knew Prudence's eyes lingered longer on her father than on herself. But Bartholomew only grunted his approval, sipping coffee, as if the matter were sealed. That afternoon, as Mae worked the corral, she felt eyes on her. Dennis was inside, breaking a bay colt, notorious for its temper. The animal bucked hard, dust rising in choking clouds. Dennis held fast, muscles taut, his face set in grim patience. Mae leaned on the rail, torn between admiration and frustration. He never asked for more than his pay, never let slip the thoughts behind those dark eyes. He finally calmed the colt, stroking its neck, and without looking up said, "Word is rustlers hit the northern range last night." Mae straightened. "Already, Deputy Dawes says they cut through the fence line and drove cattle north. Funny thing though, trail signs look too clean." Dennis finally looked her way, voice low, like someone wanted to blame a drifter. Before Mae could reply, Nash Dawes himself appeared at the gate, his badge catching the sun. He tipped his hat, lips curling in a smile that never reached his eyes. "Evenin', Miss Reddick. Thought I'd warn you cowboys wanderin' near your herd. Best not trust every saddle tramp that passes through." His glance flicked toward Dennis before he turned away. Mae's blood simmered. She didn't like the way Nash's gaze measured and weighed, as if every man and woman in the county were cattle to be tallied. The warning came too late. That night, the cattle stirred restless under the stars. Then came the crack of powder and the flash of firecrackers, explosions meant to spook the herd. With a roar like thunder, thousands of hooves pounded the dry ground, driving the herd straight toward the riverbed. Mae mounted bareback and raced after them, dust clawing at her throat. Beside her, Dennis urged his horse into the stampede, swinging his riata to turn the lead steers. The herd split, charging toward the mud-choked channel. A steer lurched sideways, colliding with Dennis's horse. He tumbled hard, sliding toward the sucking mud of the river's edge. Mae screamed his name, yanking Sorrel around, flinging a rope. The loop caught his arm, and she heaved back, muscles burning, dragging him from the mire as hooves thundered past. For one breathless moment, their eyes locked his, dark with shock, hers blazing with fear. She dared not speak. Then something glinted in the muck. Mae dismounted, bent, and pulled free a small blade, half buried in wet clay. A plain paper knife, initials scratched deep into the handle, ND. Her hand tightened around it as the dust settled. Nash Dawes's shadow loomed larger than ever, and the reckoning had only begun. The sun bled down across the prairie, staining the horizon in bands of copper and violet. The Reddick ranch yard bustled with men hauling feed, mending fence, driving the restless herd back toward safety. Dust hung heavy in the air, thicker than smoke, clinging to skin and hair. Mae Reddick wiped her brow with the back of her hand, but the unease in her chest had nothing to do with heat or grit. In her pocket rested the small knife she had pulled from the river mud, its handle marked with 2 etched letters, ND. She had not yet told anyone, not even Dennis, who walked stiffly beside her, with the limp of a man whose ribs still ached from being thrown. He led his gelding Copper back to the stable, his movements steady but slow. Mae wanted to speak, to ask if he had seen the initials, if he suspected what she now suspected. But her father's voice thundered from the porch. "Mae, inside, now." She obeyed, though every step toward the house felt heavier. The parlor smelled of cigar smoke and leather polish. Bartholomew Reddick stood tall, his wide shoulders filling the room, and across from him sat 2 men Mae had not expected so soon. Silas Keene lounged in a chair, like it was his own, one boot crossed over his knee, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His dark mustache twitched as he grinned at Mae. "Evening, Miss Reddick. Heard the herd gave you a scare last night. Lucky for y'all, I've got buyers lined up who'll pay fair even for spooked beef." Beside him, August Trent looked more refined, his suit dusted, but carefully pressed, his hair oiled neat. He offered a polite bow from where he stood by the mantel. "Miss Reddick, my bank in Amarillo is prepared to extend generous credit. In times of drought, a man must think beyond the season, build alliances to withstand it." Bartholomew gestured toward them. "These men represent opportunity. A ranch is only as strong as the hands behind it. Keene offers coin, Trent offers credit. With one of them as your husband, Mae, the Reddick name will stand secure." Mae's lips pressed tight. "And what do they offer besides cattle and credit? Do they offer respect? A partner who listens?" Keene chuckled low. "Respect don't keep fences mended, girl. But my money does." Trent raised a hand, his tone softer. "Marriage can be many things, Miss Reddick. Partnership, yes. But also a contract. You and I could make it one of honor." Bartholomew cut her off with a wave. "Think on it, Mae. The harvest dance is close. You'll choose and the ranch will survive." Mae's chest burned. She excused herself and stormed into the kitchen, where the air smelled of bread and onions. Old Murray hunched over the stove, stirring a pot, his grizzled hair damp with sweat. "You heard?" she asked. "Walls hear everything," Murray said. He lifted a folded ledger from beneath a loaf of cooling bread. "Found this tucked in Nash Dawes's saddlebag while he drank himself silly in town. Man's not careful as he thinks." Mae unfolded the book. Inside were columns of numbers, names and payments. Ranchers paying protection, sometimes in cattle, sometimes in fawn. Her own father's name appeared small, but undeniable, a note beside they see it. Deferred due harvest easterist. Her stomach dropped. "He's been paying Nash." Murray's eyes softened. "Or Nash has been taking it, calling it law. Hard to say. But truth's here." She flipped through page after page, her anger hardening. If this came out, then Panhandle'd see Dawes for what he is. But careful, girl. Truth's a flame. Hold it wrong and it burns you first. Mae set her jaw. "Then I'll carry it right." She tucked the ledger under her arm. "But I need a copy." Later that night, by lamplight in her room, she painstakingly copied every figure, every name, her hand cramping around the quill. She hid the original inside Murray's oven, beneath the iron grate, where bread baked. The copy she pressed flat, inside her saddlebag. The next day trouble came calling. Deputy Nash Dawes rode into the yard with 2 men at his side. His badge gleamed, and his smile was all teeth. He dismounted slow, striding toward Bartholomew, then glanced deliberately toward Dennis, who was oiling his saddle by the barn. "News travels fast," Nash said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Seems the rustlers who spooked your herd last night had a leader. Witness claims it was none other than Dennis Crow. Figures, a drifter with no ties, no kin, and no reason to stay straight." Mae's heart lurched. "That's a lie." Nash tilted his head. "Is it man's got scars on his back that look like rustler whips? And that saddlebag of his perfect for hiding stolen bills of sale." Dennis straightened, his face unreadable, but the flare in his eyes betrayed his fury. "You'll not pin your crimes on me, Dawes." Nash spread his hands. "Crimes? I never said crimes, just suspicion. Law lets me hold him on suspicion." He nodded to his deputies. They stepped forward. Mae moved between them, her fists balled. "You have no proof." "Proof?" Nash laughed. "Proof is what the sheriff believes and what a jury of ranchers wants to hear. And last I checked, they all owe me favors." Bartholomew stepped onto the porch, face like carved stone. "Enough." Mae whirled on him. "Father, you can't let them take him." Bartholomew's eyes met hers, weary and gray. The law is the law, Mae. What else can I do? Her throat tightened. Give me one night. One night to prove the truth. If I fail, if I can't show you who Dawes really is, then I'll choose one of your men at the harvest dance. I'll do as you say. The silence that followed stretched taut. At last Bartholomew nodded once, slow and grim. One night. Don't waste it. Nash smirked, satisfied. Fine. I'll give your cowboy a night. Then I'll have him in irons. He mounted up, spurring away in a spray of dust. Mae turned to Dennis. His eyes softened for the first time, though his jaw still clenched tight. You didn't have to bargain your future, he murmured. Mae swallowed. Yes, I did. Because if I don't fight, there'll be no future at all. Not for you. Not for me. Not for this ranch. For a moment, the hot wind carried only the sound of grass hissing against the fence posts. Mae felt the weight of the choice she had made one night, to uncover a truth buried under dust and fear. One night, to prove the man she loved was not the villain they painted him to be, and she would not fail. The jail in Amarillo sat like a blister on the edge of town, brick walls baked red by the summer sun, barred windows narrow as slits. Mae's boots struck hard against the boardwalk as she approached, her heart hammering faster than her steps. Dust swirled in little devils across the street, and a pair of old ranch hands stared as she passed, their whispers pricking her skin. That's Reddick's girl. Going to see the rustler they caught. The thought stung. Dennis was no rustler. She knew it in her bones. But the whole town had been fed Dawes's poison, and now suspicion clung to Dennis like burrs to a horse's tail. Inside the jailhouse, the air was thick with heat and the smell of stale tobacco. Deputy Nash Dawes leaned back in a chair, boots propped on the desk, hat tipped low. He raised it only when Mae entered, his grin slow and mocking. Afternoon, Miss Reddick. Come to see your, what shall I call him? Your suitor. Your outlaw sweetheart. Mae's fists clenched. I came to see a man you're railroading without proof. Nash rose and strolled to the cell. Behind the bars sat Dennis, his broad shoulders bent slightly, his face in shadow. His shirt was torn from the scuffle of arrest, a bruise blooming purple on his jaw. But his eyes, those dark eyes, met hers, steady and calm. You've got one night, Nash drawled, jangling the keys. After that he goes before a judge, and I'll see to it the jury's thirsting for blood. Men round here don't forget lost cattle. Mae forced herself to stand tall. I'll bring proof, Dawes. And when I do, you'll be the one behind those bars. He chuckled low and cruel. The law's a rope, Miss Reddick. Depends on who holds it. She turned away, before her anger burned her tongue raw. But as she left, Dennis spoke, his voice roughened by dust and pride. Mae, don't waste yourself on me. She paused at the door. I already bargained my future for one night. I won't waste it. That evening, back at the ranch, the house was heavy with silence. Bartholomew sat at the dining table with Silas Keene on one side and Prudence Vale on the other. Papers lay spread before them, contracts, bills of sale, promises of cash. Keene's cigar smoke curled toward the ceiling as he leaned in. It's simple, Bart Keene said, using the familiarity of a man who had no right to it. Your daughter marries me, I buy your beef, clear your debts, and Dawes leaves your herd alone. Or she marries Trent, and you've got bank credit enough to last till spring. Either way, the Reddick spread stands tall. Prudence reached over, laying a manicured hand on Bartholomew's arm. Don't drag this out, Bart. Mae's a fine girl, but she can't shoulder this ranch alone. A harvest wedding will set everything right. Mae stepped into the room, her voice cutting clear. A harvest wedding will chain me to a lie. I won't marry a man to buy protection. Bartholomew's eyes flashed. You think you have the luxury of pride. This ranch is more than land. It's blood, sweat, generations. Do you want to see it swallowed by debt? I want to see it stand on truth, Mae shot back. And I will, if you give me until tomorrow night. Keen smirked. Truth don't put beef on a railca. Mae ignored him. She looked at her father pleading. One night, Papa. That's all I asked. Let me keep my word. Bartholomew's jaw worked, but at last he gave a curt nod. Keen cursed under his breath, shoving back from the table, but Mae felt a flicker of hope spark in her chest. She found Miriam Dawes that night, at the back of the dressmaker's shop, bent over a half-finished hem. The young woman's face was pale, her fingers trembling with each stitch. When Macy touched her shoulder, Miriam flinched. I know what your brother's done, Mae said gently. And I know you do too. Miriam's eyes filled with tears. If I speak, he'll ruin me. He says I'll end up in the poorhouse or worse. Nash don't let go of things he thinks he owns. Mae knelt beside her. He doesn't own you. You're stronger than he is. And if you don't speak more, men like Dennis will hang for nothing. For a long moment, Miriam's lips pressed tight. Then she rolled up her sleeve, revealing bruises along her arm. He grabbed me when I tried to burn his ledger, said if I opened my mouth, he'd bury me same as the cattle he sells off the books. Mae swallowed her rage. Will you tell that tomorrow night? At the dance, Miriam's chin trembled, but she nodded. If it means ending him, yes. The following morning, August Trent rode out to the ranch, his carriage raising a trail of dust behind it. He found Mae by the corral, saddling Sorrel. He dismounted, removing his gloves with deliberate care. Miss Reddick, he said softly, I hear the talk. Dawes has the town's ear, and Keen has its coin. You stand in the middle, and the weight of it is crushing. Mae bristled. If you've come to press your case again, save your words. Trent shook his head. No. I came to say this. Don't marry me or Keen or any man to save a ranch. Don't sell your heart like stock at auction. You deserve better than that. She blinked, caught off guard. Why tell me this? Because I believe alliances should be chosen freely, not forced. And because I respect you. He smiled faintly, tipping his hat. If you decide otherwise, I'll be here. But if you don't, I'll not think less of you. Mae watched him right away, her chest tight with something she could not name. For the first time she saw that not every man at her father's table sought to use her. That night, as the prairie wind hissed through the dry grass, Bartholomew stood with Sheriff Hollibird on the porch. Mae overheard their low voices, the sheriff's gravelly tone promising I'll be there at the dance. Dawes thinks he runs this county, but law's still got a spine. We'll see it tomorrow night. Mae lingered in the shadows, hand brushing the copy of the ledger hidden at her waist. Tomorrow night. One chance, one truth. In her room she sat by the window long after midnight, the stars blazing over the parched land. The air smelled of dust and hope, bitter and sweet. She thought of Dennis behind bars, the bruise on his jaw, the way he had told her not to waste herself. She whispered into the wind as though it might carry her vow to him. I won't waste it. I'll fight until the truth stands. And as the night deepened, the hot wind carried her words across the empty plains, a promise sharp as steel. The harvest dance blazed bright against the night lanterns, strung across rafters and fences, their light shimmering off corn husks and ribbons. Fiddles screeched, lively reels boots stomped in rhythm, and the air was thick with the scent of secured roasted meat and sweat. Yet beneath the laughter ran a taut wire of expectation. Everyone knew this night wasn't only for dancing. It was for deciding. Mae Reddick stood near the head table, her gown plain compared to the silks of visiting daughters from Amarillo, but her presence commanded attention nonetheless. She could feel eyes following her every move, Keen's greedy gaze, Trent's quiet watchfulness, Prudence's calculating smile. Her father's hand landed heavy on her shoulder. Tonight, Bartholomew said, his voice carrying over the music, my daughter will choose her husband. and with him, the future of this ranch. The crowd erupted in cheers and clinks of glasses. But Mae's stomach twisted. She looked down the length of the table, where old Murray ladled stew into bowls, where Miriam Dawes sat pale and silent, and where Dennis lingered near the doorway, the shadows clinging to him. Though technically free for the night, he remained an outcast under suspicion, the mark of Dawes's accusations clinging to him like a brand. Mae lifted her chin. She would not let this night pass as Nash planned. She stepped forward, a folded booklet clutched in her hand. Her voice rang out above the din. Before I choose a husband, I will choose the truth. The music faltered. Heads turned. Bartholomew's brows drew down in warning, but Mae ignored him. She placed the ledger copy on the long oak table with a sharp slap. This book holds the names of men who have been paying Deputy Nash Dawes for protection. It shows he has bled this county dry while pretending to uphold the law. A murmur rippled through the hall. Men shifted uneasily. Keene's face darkened. Trent looked grim but not surprised. The doors banged open. Nash Dawes strode in, his badge gleaming, his smile feral. "What a pretty tale," he sneered, snatching up the ledger. He flipped through the pages, then held it aloft. "But it's a forgery. The desperate scribbles of a rancher's daughter who'll say anything to protect her hired hand." He hurled the book to the floor, the pages scattering. The crowd gasped. Mae's heart clenched, but then old Murray stepped forward from the kitchen, his hands blackened with soot. From beneath his apron, he drew another book, edges still warm from the oven. "This here's the original," Murray rasped, slamming it onto the table. "Kept safe where Dawes wouldn't dare look." "Pages don't lie." Gasps rose louder. Nash's jaw clenched. He turned, eyes narrowing, only to see Dennis stride from the shadows. In his hand gleamed the small knife Mae had found in the riverbank, the initials cut deep, ND. Dennis's voice rang out steady. "Drop this while you spook the herd with firecrackers. Proof enough for anyone who's ridden cattle trails." The room buzzed, men muttering, heads nodding. But Mae knew words alone might not hold. She looked to Miriam. The young woman trembled, but Mae's eyes urged her on. Miriam rose, her voice shaking yet clear. He threatened me. When I tried to burn his ledger, he struck me." She pulled back her sleeve, revealing bruises stark against pale skin. "He said he'd bury me same as cattle if I spoke." The hall erupted. Cries of shame and lawless dog filled the air. Nash's face twisted, rage boiling over. He drew his revolver with a snarl. "You think you can ruin me with your lies?" Dennis lunged, kicking the weapon aside, as the shot fired wild into the rafters. The crowd scattered, women shrieking, men overturning chairs. Nash's deputies rushed in, grappling with Dennis. One seized a thick rope of braided husks from the decorations and looped it around Dennis's neck. With a vicious yank, they dragged him backward, choking his face, contorting with strain. No, Mae screamed. She shoved through the chaos, her hand flying to the small hunting knife at her belt. She slashed at the husk rope, sparks of lantern light, catching the blade. The fibers tore with a crack, and Dennis collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. Nash lunged toward her, but a commanding voice bellowed, "Hold it right there." Sheriff Hollibird stood at the entrance, flanked by two armed men. His revolver pointed straight at Dawes. By the authority, for a long heartbeat, the hall held its breath. The echoes of the gunshot still rattled the lanterns, smoke curling near the rafters. Then Sheriff Hollibird stepped fully into the room, his heavy boots striking the floorboards with a cadence like judgment itself. His revolver never wavered from Nash Dawes. "By the authority of this county," the sheriff barked at Deputy Dawes, "you're under arrest for extortion, assault, and misuse of the law. Drop your hands or I'll drop you." The crowd parted, murmurs swelling into a storm. Nash's face twisted, the smirk gone. For an instant, he seemed poised to fight, his fingers twitching near his belt. But Holabird's deputies flanked him, iron in their eyes, rifles cocked. Slowly Nash raised his hands. The rope fibers still clung to his palm, damning as any confession. Holabird's men seized him, clapping irons on his wrists. The sound of steel against steel flacked louder than any fiddle note. A roar of voices filled the hall. Some cried outrage, others shouted relief. Men who had once shaken Nash's hand now spat on the floor, their courage growing in the safety of numbers. Knew he was crooked, one muttered. Bled me for 2 steers last winter, another said. Through it all, Mae stood frozen, her knife still in her hand. Dennis collapsed against her knees. She dropped the blade and helped him upright. His breath rasped raw, his throat red where the rope had burned. Yet when he looked at her, his eyes held steady warmth. You cut me free, he whispered, voice hoarse. I always will, Mae answered, her hands trembling. But firmly Bartholomew Reddick pushed through the throng, his face pale beneath the lantern glow. For a moment, he looked every bit his age. The iron of his posture softened. He faced the sheriff, then his daughter. So, the law finally speaks true. Holabird gave a curt nod. Truth has a way of finding daylight, Bart. Even in the Panhandle. He turned, hauling Nash toward the door. This man will stand trial. And if the ledger holds as much as I think, he'll hang by a rope of his own making. The hall erupted again, a mixture of cheers and uneasy whispers. Holabird left with his men, and the door slammed shut, leaving the ranchers, neighbors, and visitors to face the silence left behind. Mae looked around. Keene had gone pale, sweat beading on his temple. He shoved his chair back, muttering curses. I've no time for a ranch that spits on opportunity, he growled, pushing past startled onlookers. His departure carried no dignity, only the sour stench of fear exposed. Trent, in contrast, remained seated. He lifted his glass slowly, then set it aside untouched. His eyes met Mae's, and he inclined his head in something like respect. Miss Reddick, he said quietly, I meant what I told you. I'll not press you into any choice that isn't yours. And should you need honest credit come spring, you know where to find me. Mae's throat tightened. For the first time that night, she smiled, faint but real. Thank you, Mr. Trent. That means more than coin. All eyes shifted back to Bartholomew. The patriarch of the Reddick Ranch stood at the head table, staring down the length of it, where scattered pages of the ledger lay, where bruises marked his daughter's arms, where Dennis's breath rasped in the hush. For decades, he had been the immovable force of this land, but tonight, the weight of it all pressed heavy. He raised his voice, weary but resolute. Mae, this ranch has stood on bargains, on sweat, on stubbornness. But perhaps it must now stand on truth. The men I brought here came seeking a bride for power, but power without honor rots. So, his gaze softened, the steel fading. Pick the man you'd ride winter with. The silence after his words was complete. Mae's heart thudded in her chest, the decision already made long before this night. She reached for Dennis, who struggled, but managed to stand tall beside her. His shirt was torn, his face bruised, but in his presence she felt steadier than any alliance of wealth could give. I choose him, Mae declared, her voice strong enough to cut through the hall. Dennis Crow. Not for land, not for cattle, not for coin. For truth and for love. Gasps rippled. Some men shook their heads, muttering of wasted opportunity, but others nodded, murmuring approval, the tide shifting as courage grew. Miriam Dawes stepped forward, her thin shoulders squared. She chose rightly, she said, her voice steady. Better an honest cowboy than a crooked lawman. The room erupted into competing voices, whispers, and shouts blending, but Mae no longer heard them. She felt Dennis's rough hand close around hers, warm and certain. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, she felt free. Bartholomew looked at them long, then bowed his head. So be it, he murmured. Let the Panhandle know the Reddicks stand with truth. Later, as the crowd thinned and the music faltered back to life in a subdued tune, Mae stepped outside into the night. The prairie stretched endless, the wind hot and restless, carrying dust across the horizon. Dennis joined her, his movements slow but steady, sorrel and copper tied near beside. The lantern light spilled across them as Mae whispered, "What happens now?" Dennis's smile was faint, but his words carried surety. "Now we keep what matters." She tilted her head. "And what's that?" He looked out across the parched land, then back to her. "Keep the herd when rivers dry. Keep the well when dust rise. And keep your word when the wind changes." Mae felt the oath settle deep inside her bones. The Panhandle wind gusted then, tugging at her hair, carrying their vow across the land. Behind them, the hall echoed with whispers, alliances broken and reshaped. Prudence Vale slipped quietly out, her ambitions shriveled. Trent lingered, offering nods of respect before departing with dignity. Miriam found her place by old Murray's side, safe at last from her brother's shadow. But Mae and Dennis rode away from the lantern glow, their hands clasped, their future as wide as the horizon. The night smelled of dust and promise, and though the Panhandle wind could be cruel, it also carried freedom. For Mae Reddick and Dennis Crow, that was enough. The dawn after the harvest dance broke without ceremony. The sky, a pale sheet, stretched across the horizon. The prairie still carried the scent of spilled cider and the echoes of fiddles, but the Reddick ranch had shifted in ways no music could mend. By mid-morning, word had already spread across Amarillo. Deputy Nash Dawes was in irons, bound for trial in Fort Worth. Ranchers who had once feared him now muttered his name with contempt, spitting into the dust as though to cleanse their mouths of his corruption. Silas Keene was among the first to leave. He rose out before the sun was high. His fine clothes rumpled, his cigar cold. His men trailed after him, driving a wagon of supplies he had claimed in barter. He did not look back at the Reddick spread. Pride would not allow it. For years he had swaggered across the Panhandle, but by noon, his shadow had thinned, swallowed by the wide horizon. In town, August. Trent sat behind the polished desk of his bank, the morning light slanting through tall windows. Papers stacked neatly before him, contracts waiting for signatures. Yet his thoughts wandered to the ranch he had left the night before. His words to Mae still echoed, "Don't sell your heart like stock at auction." For the first time in years he felt at peace with a refusal. When a ranch hand from the Reddicks arrived with a note requesting honest credit for feed through winter, Trent signed it without hesitation, no strings attached. It was business, yes, but this time it was also respect. Prudence Vale returned to her hotel in Amarillo with little fanfare. She had come to the ranch with dreams of tying herself to Bartholomew's fortune, but the sight of truth unraveling had left her ambitions threadbare. She poured coffee for her lodgers that morning, with her usual grace, but her eyes lacked the sparkle they once carried. People noticed, whispered that Prudence had overplayed her hand. In time she would recover, but her dreams of becoming mistress of the Reddick ranch were buried with the embers of the harvest dance. At the ranch itself, life stirred again in ordinary rhythms. Old Murray clanged pots in the kitchen, his booming voice calling orders, as though the world had not shifted beneath their boots. Yet a new presence steadied the air. Miriam Dawes. She had risen early, eyes shadowed, but resolute, and asked for work. Murray handed her a basket of dough with gruff approval. "Bread keeps better when hands are honest," he said. Miriam smiled faintly, the bruises on her arms fading, but the strength in her gaze growing. For the first time in years, she stood free of her brother's control, and though the future was uncertain, it was hers to claim. Bartholomew Reddick moved through his land slower that day. He walked the fence lines, touched the dry earth, and studied the ski. The weight of years pressed on him, heavier than the sun overhead. He knew the ranch's debts had not vanished with Dawes's arrest, nor had the land's thirst for water lessened. But something had changed inside him. His daughter had stood against him, and for the first time, he saw not defiance, but strength. That evening, he lingered on the porch, watching Mae and Dennis saddle their horses. He did not speak, but when Mae glanced back, his nod was small, almost imperceptible. Yet it was enough. Mae swung onto Sorrel, her dark hair loose against the hot wind. Dennis mounted Copper, moving gingerly still from bruises but sitting proud. They rode side by side across the open pasture, the land stretching endless in every direction. The prairie bore its scars openly, grass brown to brittle stalks, earth cracked and thirsty. Yet in that wide emptiness lay a freedom too vast to measure. Mae inhaled deeply, dust sharp in her lungs, and felt the weight of the night behind her begin to lift. For a long while, they rode in silence, the hoofbeats steady as a heartbeat. Finally, Dennis broke it, his voice casté but firm toi. What you did last night, it cost you everything your father thought he wanted. You'll not regret it. Mae looked at him, her eyes steady. I regret nothing that brings me truth. He nodded, gaze fixed on the horizon. Then let's make it ours, a vow between us, same as land and skisai. She tilted her head. What vow? Dennis slowed Copper until both horses stood still at the crest of a low ridge. The wind rushed around them, hot and restless. He lifted his hand, calloused fingers brushing hers. Keep the herd when rivers dry. Keep the well when dust rises. And keep your word when the wind changes. Mae repeated the words softly, each one settling into her, like a seed taking root. Keep the herd. Keep the well. Keep the word. Their hands clasped tighter. The wind whipped around them, carrying the oath across the empty land, as though the Panhandle itself bore witness. Below the ranch stretched in muted colors, fences thin as pencil lines against the wide expanse. Somewhere, cattle lowed restless in the heat. Life would not grow easier. The debts, the drought, the endless work of survival remained. But Mae felt certainty bloom inside her. Together, she and Dennis could weather it. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in fire, they turned their horses back toward home. Behind them lay a night of shattered illusions, of Keen's greed, Dawes's downfall, Prudence's retreat. Before them lay a horizon unclaimed, open and raw. Miriam's laughter drifted faint from the kitchen, where she worked with Murray, a fragile but hopeful sound. Trent's signature on the credit line promised survival through winter, without a noose of obligation. Even Bartholomew, hardened as he was, seemed to soften with each passing hour, as though truth itself had worn down the stone of his sobriety. Mae leaned into the wind, her voice barely louder than a whisper. We found it, Dennis, a life worth living. Dennis glanced at her, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare, genuine smile. And we'll keep it Panhandle way. The wind howled across the prairie, carrying their vow into the distance. For the first time, Mae did not hear it as a warning, but as a song, a fierce, unending song of land and love, of dust and hope, of two souls choosing freedom above all. And as night gathered, they rode together beneath the wide Texas sky, the stars burning like silent witnesses to the oath they had sworn. The weeks after the harvest dance passed like a slow tide, each day dragging the weight of what had been revealed. In town, the trial of Nash Dawes became the talk of every saloon and mercantile. Newspapers from Fort Worth carried his name in bold letters, branding him a lawman turned thief. Testimonies poured in, ranchers who had been forced to pay, families ruined by his greed, Miriam's brave words written down as proof of his cruelty. At the Reddick Ranch, the rhythms of daily life pushed forward, though nothing felt quite the same. The herd needed constant watching. The drought still gnawed at grass and wells. But there was a steadiness now, a sense that truth had burned away the rot. Mae and Dennis worked side by side in the heat, their movements in sync, as if they had always shared the burden. One blistering afternoon, Mae rode the southern fence, while Dennis hammered new posts into the hard earth. His shirt clung with sweat, his muscles taut. Yet when he looked up at her, there was no bitterness in his expression, only determination. "Fence won't hold long if rain don't come," he muttered, wiping his brow. Mae reined in sorrel, gazing over the dry expanse. "Then we hold until it does. That's what the oath means." He grinned faintly, the corners of his mouth creasing. "You take words serious, Mae." "Someone has to," she shot back, but her smile softened the edge. Inside the house, Bartholomew had changed in ways Mae had not thought possible. He still carried himself with the stern pride of a rancher, but his voice had lost some of its thunder. One evening, as Mae and Dennis returned from the range, they found him on the porch, whittling a piece of mesquite. "You ride well together," he said without preamble. Mae stiffened, waiting for criticism, but none came. Bartholomew's gaze lingered on Dennis. "I fought the idea of you. Thought you'd take more than you'd give. But I was wrong. A man who stands against Dawes and near loses his life for it, that's a man worth calling family." Dennis shifted, unused to such words. "I never asked for your land, sir. Only a fair chance to prove myself." Bartholomew nodded slowly. "And you have." He looked at Mae, his eyes softer. "Your mother would have been proud." Mae felt her throat tighten. For the first time in years, she saw her father not as an immovable wall, but as a man weary of carrying too much alone. In the kitchen, Miriam Dawes thrived under old Murray's watchful eye. She kneaded dough with steady hands, flour dusting her apron like a badge of honest labor. At first she had flinched at loud voice, but each day she grew surer, her laughter returning in small bursts. Murray treated her like kin, fussing over her meals, barking orders. She answered with mock salutes. "You've got a backbone, girl," Murray said one morning as he tasted her bread. "Don't let anyone bend it again." Miriam smiled shyly. "Not with you here, I won't." Her presence filled the ranch with a quiet resilience, a reminder that wounds could heal if given space and kindness. Meanwhile, August Trent remained true to his word. He visited the ranch once with papers for feed credit, but pressed nothing more. His carriage gleamed in the sun, yet he carried himself without arrogance. He and Bartholomew spoke briefly, terms agreed upon with firm handshakes. As he prepared to leave, Trent caught Mae's eye. "The Panhandle has sharp edges," he said, "but men like Dawes don't get to own them anymore. Not while folks like you stand watch." Mae inclined her head, gratitude warming her chest. In another life, perhaps Trent might have been more, but here and now, his role was clear: an ally, not a husband, a reminder that not all power sought chains. One evening, a dust storm rolled across the plains, a wall of brown swallowing the horizon. Mae and Dennis scrambled to drive the herd into shelter, the cattle bawling as grit filled the air. The wind howled fierce, pelting them with sand until their eyes stung. Dennis rode hard, voice hoarse as he shouted, "Keep 'em moving. Don't let the calves fall behind." Mae pushed sorrel through the chaos, her braid whipping loose, her throat raw from dust. For hours they battled the storm, guiding the herd with ropes and stubborn will. At last, when the wind began to ease, the cattle huddled close against the canyon walls, safe. They sat their horses side by side, lungs burning, faces streaked with grit. Dennis reached across his hand, finding hers in the darkening storm. "You kept the herd," he rasped. She squeezed his fingers. "We kept it. Together." Their laughter rose ragged but real, carried off by the lingering wind. When the sky cleared, stars blazed sharp and bright, scattered across the black dome of heaven. Mae leaned against Dennis as they rode homeward, her heart steady despite exhaustion. She thought of the oath again, the words etched not in books, but in sweat and sacrifice. "Keep the herd when rivers dry. keep the well when dust rises, and keep your word when the wind changes. At the ranch, lantern light glowed in the windows. Miriam's silhouette moved in the kitchen, Murray's voice rumbling. Bartholomew stood once more on the porch, his figure outlined against the soft glow waiting. Mae realized then that the ranch was more than land and cattle. It was people broken, mended, tested, but bound together by truth. As she and Dennis dismounted, the wind swept across the yard, hot and restless. Mae lifted her face to it, no longer hearing menace in its howl. Now it sounded like freedom. Dennis's arm slipped around her shoulders. "Panhandle's hard," he said quietly. Mae leaned against him, smiling. "So are we." And as the night deepened over the vast Texas plains, their oath carried once more into the endless dark, a promise not just for themselves, but for every soul who believed that love and truth could outlast even the harshest wind.